Ever wonder what kind of man would stand alone against an entire town? What it takes to look past fear and see someone worth saving when everyone else only sees a monster. Back in '78, I witnessed such a thing in Willow Creek when a quiet cowboy named Jack Morrison paid $500, nearly everything he had, to free a woman they called the Giant Widow. Folks said she was dangerous, said she'd killed 3 men with her bare hands. But Jack saw something different in her cage, something the rest of us missed. And what happened next? Well, it's a story about what real courage looks like when it stands in the face of fear and prejudice. I remember the day Jack rode into town, dust coating his clothes, hat pulled low over eyes that had seen too much war and not enough peace. Wasn't looking for trouble, wasn't looking for a cause. Just a man trying to outrun his ghosts. Funny how sometimes the very thing you're running from is what you need to face head-on. The morning sun had just begun to warm the fields when Jack Morrison leaned against the corral fence, studying the wild-eyed pinto stallion circling inside. The horse snorted, nostrils flaring, hooves kicking up dust with each defiant pass. 3 men had already tried to break him. All 3 had been thrown. "You sure about this, Morrison?" Tom Hawkins spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "That devil horse broke Pete Simmons' collarbone last week." Jack didn't answer right away. His weathered hands, calloused from years of rope and reins, worked methodically at checking the cinch on his saddle. Those hands told a story of hard work, of holding tight when others let go, of gentleness when needed. "Horse ain't the devil," Jack finally said, voice low and measured. "Just scared and proud. Bad combination, but not evil." Hawkins snorted. "For $5, he's your problem now." Jack nodded once and slipped into the corral, moving slow and deliberate. The pinto's ears flattened, eyes rolling white. Jack didn't look directly at the horse, just stood there, quiet and still as the fence post beside him. A minute passed, then another. "Waste of time," someone muttered from the gathering crowd, but Jack paid no mind. He'd learned patience in the war, learned that rushing only got men killed. When the pinto finally stopped pawing and snorting, Jack took 1 step forward, then another, speaking in a low murmur. "Easy now. Nobody here to hurt you. Just you and me figuring things out." A small boy of about 8 had squeezed between the fence rails, watching wide-eyed. Jack noticed him, but kept his focus on the horse. After nearly 20 minutes of this careful dance, Jack was at the pinto's side, one hand resting lightly on its sweat-dampened neck. The horse trembled, but stood still. "Mister," the boy whispered, "how come you didn't use the whip like the others?" Jack glanced over. "Because pain just teaches fear, son. Fear makes creatures dangerous. Understanding makes 'em partners." With a smooth motion, born of decades in the saddle, Jack swung up onto the pinto's back. The horse tensed, crow-hopped twice, then settled, as if deciding this human might be different from the others. "I'll be damned," Hawkins muttered. "Language, Tom," Jack said, nodding toward the boy. "We got young ears present." As Jack rode the pinto, in slow, careful circles, the boy's father appeared, grabbing him by the collar. "Sorry, Mr. Morrison. Billy's always getting where he shouldn't." "No harm done," Jack replied, bringing the horse to a stop. "Boy's got a right to learn." He dismounted, handed the reins to Hawkins, and knelt before the boy. "Horse is like people. They remember who treats 'em fair and who doesn't. You remember that, Billy." The boy nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir." Jack straightened, wincing slightly at the stiffness in his left knee, an old war wound that bothered him in the mornings. "I'll take him. Jack told Hawkins, pulling $5 from his pocket, money he'd been saving for new fence posts. Need work, but he'll make a good horse. Hawkins counted the bills, shaking his head. You always did have more patience than sense, Morrison. Jack's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. Been told that before. The general store in Willow Creek wasn't much to look at, weathered clapboard front with a crooked sign. But Walter Green kept it well stocked and honest. Jack tied the pinto outside, patting its neck before heading in. Bell above the door jangled as he entered. Walter looked up from where he was measuring coffee beans for Mrs. Peterson. Jack Morrison, Walter nodded. Heard you tamed Hawkins' devil horse this morning. News traveled fast in small towns. Jack shrugged, removing his hat. Just needed understanding is all. Mrs. Peterson turned, approval in her eyes. That Hawkins would have shot the poor creature if nobody bought him. Jack nodded politely, but said nothing. Wasn't his place to criticize another man's business. He moved to the back counter, making a mental list of what he needed. Flour, coffee, ammunition. Put it on your account? Walter asked when Jack had gathered his supplies. Rather settle up now, Jack replied, counting out bills from a small leather pouch. He didn't like owing, not even to friends. Walter pushed back a few coins. Coffee's on the house. Just got a shipment from St. Louis. Wanted your opinion. It was Walter's way of showing respect, and Jack accepted with a nod. The shopkeeper was one of the few people in town who knew Jack had ridden with the 1st Colorado Cavalry during the war. They'd never discussed it directly, wasn't their way, but Walter's brother had served in the same outfit, died at Sand Creek. Sometimes that created a bond stronger than blood. Obliged, Jack said, pocketing the coins. How's Sarah doing? Walter's face softened at the mention of his wife. Doc says the baby should come any day now. 3rd one, right? 4th, Walter corrected with pride. God willing, another strong boy. Jack nodded, something flickering behind his eyes that might have been pain, might have been memory. He'd never had children of his own. His Emma had died too young for that. The store was filling up with the midday crowd. Jack recognized most faces, received polite nods from some, curious glances from others. He'd lived outside Willow Creek for 3 years now, but remained something of an outsider. By his own choice mostly. He preferred the quiet of his small ranch to town gossip. As he gathered his purchases, Lester Davis pushed through the door, always too loud for the space he occupied. You folks hear about Franklin's new attraction, Lester announced to the room at large. Got himself a real live monster behind the saloon. Jack continued wrapping his parcels, but his ears picked up. Charging 2 bits a look, Lester continued. Worth every penny, too. Woman big as a grizzly who killed 3 men with her bare hands. What woman? Mrs. Peterson asked, scandalized but curious. They call her the Giant Widow. Franklin bought her from over Red Rock way after she murdered those men who came to collect a debt. Lester leaned forward, lowering his voice theatrically. Got her in a cage like a wild animal. And looking at her, that's exactly what she is. Jack finished tying his package, face impassive. You seen that Giant Widow they got caged up at Franklin's place? Lester had noticed Jack and directed the question at him, clearly hoping for a reaction. Can't say that I have, Jack replied, paying more attention to adjusting his hat than the conversation. They say she's near 7 foot tall. Killed 3 men with her bare hands when they come after her on her farm. Snapped 'em like twigs. That a fact? Jack's voice remained even, but something in his eyes hardened. Franklin charges 2 bits just to look at her. Says he's protecting the town by keeping her locked up. Jack set his purchases on the counter. Walter, Would you mind holding these for an hour or so? Got something I need to see to." Walter nodded, concern crossing his features. He knew Jack well enough to recognize that quiet tone. Jack placed his hat on his head, adjusting the brim with deliberate care. "Reckon I'll have to see for myself." As he stepped out into the sunlight, Jack felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he'd had before every battle, the feeling that told him something wasn't right, and that someone needed to make it right. For all his efforts to live quietly, to mind his own business, there were some things a man couldn't walk away from, some things a man shouldn't walk away from. Franklin's saloon stood at the far end of Willow Creek's main street, a two-story affair with peeling paint and a crooked sign. Not the finest establishment, but it did steady business. A hand-painted board, propped beside the bat-wing doors, announced, "See the Giant Widow, Killer of 3 Men, 25C." Jack paused before entering, noting how the board was decorated with crude drawings of a monstrous woman behind bars. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Inside, the saloon was busy for mid-afternoon, unusual until Jack spotted the crowd gathered around the back door. He made his way to the bar, laid down a quarter, and nodded to the barkeep. "Here to see the attraction," he said quietly. The barkeep, a wiry man with tobacco-stained teeth, scooped up the coin. "Follow the crowd through the back. Franklin's about to start another showing." Jack moved through the press of bodies, the smell of whiskey, sweat, and tobacco thick in the air. Men jostled each other for better positions, craning their necks toward a small courtyard behind the saloon. There, a cage had been constructed, not the iron bars of a proper jail, but a wooden structure reinforced with metal bands, like something meant for transporting wild animals. Inside sat a woman. Jack's first thought was that she wasn't nearly as tall as the stories claimed. Perhaps 6 feet, unusual for a woman, but hardly a giant. She sat on a wooden crate, back straight, hands folded in her lap. Her plain dress was clean, but worn thin, her dark hair pulled back severely from a face that bore the weathered look of someone who'd spent years working under the sun. "Ladies and gentlemen," Franklin's voice boomed across the yard. He was a heavy-set man with a salesman's smile and eyes that never quite matched it. "Feast your eyes on the infamous Giant Widow of Red Rock Canyon." The crowd murmured, pressing closer. Jack remained where he was, studying not the woman, but the eyes watching her, fascinated, fearful, contemptuous. "3 men went to collect an honest debt," Franklin continued dramatically, "and none returned alive. Their bodies found broken like kindling, necks snapped by these very hands." He gestured toward the woman, who didn't look up, her gaze fixed on some middle distance. But Jack caught something in her eyes, not the dull acceptance of someone broken, but the banked fire of someone enduring, waiting. "Ain't natural for a woman to have such strength," Franklin went on. "Some say she made a deal with the devil himself. But fear not. Good citizens of Willow Creek, I've secured this dangerous creature for your safety and your entertainment." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone threw a peanut shell that bounced off the cage. The woman didn't flinch. Jack felt something cold and hard forming in his chest. He'd seen men caged during the war, Union soldiers in Andersonville, their dignity stripped away for others' amusement. He'd sworn then he'd never stand by while a human being was treated as less than human. As the crowd began to disperse, Jack remained, waiting until Franklin was collecting the last few coins from latecomers. He approached the saloon owner, keeping his voice low. "She been tried for these killings?" Jack asked, his voice soft enough that only Franklin could hear. Franklin snorted. "Trial? For what? Everyone knows what she did." Seems I heard those men attacked her on her own property. Franklin's eyes narrowed, taking Jack's measure. You calling me a liar, friend? Just asking a question. Jack's tone remained even, his posture relaxed, though anyone who knew him would recognize the dangerous stillness. Listen, friend. Franklin leaned closer, lowering his voice. Woman that size ain't natural. She's dangerous, and I'm providing a public service keeping her contained. Public service charging 2 bits a look? Franklin's smile tightened. Man's got to make a living. Jack studied the woman again. She'd finally looked up, and for a brief moment their eyes met. Something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, of a shared understanding about injustice. What would it cost to buy her freedom? Jack's question hung in the air. Franklin blinked, then let out a bark of laughter. You serious? Dead serious. Franklin studied him, then named an outrageous sum. $500, and that's just 'cause I know nobody's fool enough to pay it. Jack nodded once. I'll be back tomorrow. With $500? Franklin's mockery was clear. That's right. As Jack turned to leave, Franklin called after him. She killed 3 men, Morrison. You think about that before you go letting loose something you don't understand. Jack paused, but didn't turn around. I understand more than you might think. The ride back to his small ranch was quiet, the afternoon sun slanting through the pines. Jack's mind wasn't quiet, though. It worked the problem like a tongue worrying a sore tooth. $500, nearly everything he had. Money he'd been saving these 3 years since Emma died, thinking someday he might move further west, maybe to Colorado, where the mountains reminded him of home. Inside his cabin, a simple one-room affair, with a lean-to addition for storage, Jack pulled up the loose floorboard beneath his bed. The tin box held $342, his life savings. Not enough. He sat on the edge of the bed, fingers absently tracing the worn quilt Emma had made their first year of marriage. Why was he even considering this? He didn't know this woman, owed her nothing. Yet he couldn't shake the image of her sitting in that cage, enduring humiliation with a dignity that spoke to something in him. The stillness of the cabin pressed in around him, too empty, too quiet. Emma would have known what to say, what to do. She always had a way of seeing clear to the heart of things. What would you tell me to do, Em? He whispered to the empty room. The answer came not in words, but in memory. Emma kneeling beside a wounded Confederate soldier they'd found collapsed by their barn door in '63. The war still raging, brother fighting brother, and there she was, tending an enemy with the same gentle hands she'd use on a neighbor. Man's still a man, she'd said when Jack questioned her. Hurting's still hurting. Jack stood, decision made. He walked to the corral where the pinto stallion he'd broken that morning grazed alongside his best horse, a chestnut mare he'd raised from a foal. The mare who, with proper breeding, could have produced colts worth good money for years to come. His future. Sorry, girl, he murmured, running a hand down her sleek neck. Reckon you're worth more than I thought. By first light, he'd ride to neighboring Oak Ridge, where Jim Henderson had offered 3 times to buy the mare. It would be enough with his savings to make up the $500. As he prepared for bed that night, Jack caught sight of himself in the small mirror above his wash basin. The face looking back at him was weathered, lined at the eyes and mouth, hair graying at the temples, not young anymore, not full of the fire that had once driven him to fight in a war for other men's principles. But there was something in those eyes he recognized from long ago, purpose. For 3 years since Emma died, he'd been drifting, going through the motions of living without truly engaging. Now, for reasons he couldn't fully explain even to himself, he'd found something worth standing for again. Right or wrong, foolish or wise, Jack Morrison had made his choice. And like everything else in his life, once decided, there'd be no turning back. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with frost silvering the grass as Jack rode into Willow Creek. The pinto pranced nervously beneath him, sensing his tension. The chestnut mare was gone, sold at dawn to Jim Henderson for a price that still felt like robbery, though the man had paid fair. Some things carried value beyond money. Jack tied the pinto outside the bank, withdrew his savings, and headed toward Franklin's saloon with $500 in his pocket. The weight of it felt strange. 3 years of careful living, of planning for a future that suddenly looked very different. The saloon was quiet this early. Franklin himself was behind the bar, eyebrows rising when Jack entered. A few early drinkers turned to stare. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon," Franklin said, setting down the glass he'd been polishing. Jack placed a leather pouch on the bar. $500 for the woman. Franklin's smile faltered. "Now hold on, Morrison. That was just talk yesterday. We had a deal." Jack's voice remained level, but something in his eyes made Franklin shift uncomfortably. "She's an investment. Been bringing in good money." $500 is better than good money," Jack said, "unless your word ain't worth much in this town." The challenge hung in the air. Several customers had stopped drinking to watch. Franklin's reputation was at stake now. "Fine," he finally said, sweeping the pouch off the bar. "But you're making a mistake. That woman's dangerous. Killed 3 men." "So I've heard." Jack remained impassive. "I'd like to collect my property now." The word property tasted bitter, but Jack understood the language needed here. In this time and place, a woman alone had few protections. Better she be his responsibility on paper than Franklin's prisoner, in fact. Franklin led him to the back courtyard, where Martha sat in her cage, just as she had yesterday. If she was surprised to see Jack again, she didn't show it. "Seems you've been purchased," Franklin announced, jangling a key. "This fool's paid good money to take you off my hands." Martha's eyes moved between the two men, wariness evident in every line of her body. "Stand back when I open this," Franklin warned Jack. "She's unpredictable. I'll take my chances." The key turned with a rusty squeal. Franklin swung the door open, then stepped quickly away. Martha remained seated, studying Jack with unwavering intensity. "You're free to go, ma'am," Jack said quietly, "if you'll come with me." Martha stood slowly. She was indeed tall for a woman, though nothing like the giant of Franklin's tales. When she stepped from the cage, several onlookers who had gathered took involuntary steps backward. "The monster's loose," someone muttered. Jack turned toward the voice, his gaze sweeping the small crowd that had formed. "This woman is under my protection now. Anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me directly." No one spoke, but the looks told him everything. In their eyes, he'd just aligned himself with something dangerous, something other. The invisible wall between him and the town had just become a fortress. "My horse is out front," Jack told Martha. "We should go." As they walked through the saloon, the crowd parted like water around stones. Outside, whispers followed them down the street. Martha walked with her head high, but Jack could feel the tension in her silence. The ride back to his ranch passed without conversation. Martha rode behind him on the pinto, keeping as much distance between them as the saddle allowed. When they reached his cabin, Jack dismounted and offered his hand to help her down. She ignored it, sliding from the horse with unexpected grace. "It's not much," Jack said, gesturing to the cabin, "but it's dry and warm." Martha stood in the yard, looking around the small homestead. The cabin, the lean-to storage shed, the modest corral, the vegetated garden now frost-killed and waiting for spring. "Why?" Her voice was rough from disuse. "Why would you spend everything to free me?" Jack busied himself with unsaddling the pinto. "Seemed the right thing to do. Most folks think the right thing would be leaving me in that cage, or hanging me." Jack led the horse to the corral before answering. "Most folks don't think much beyond what's easy or what everyone else is thinking." He opened the cabin door, gesturing for her to enter first. After a moment's hesitation, she did. Inside, the simplicity of his life was evident. A cast-iron stove, a small table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, a trunk at its foot. Everything neat, everything essential. "I have some of my wife's old clothes," he said, moving to the trunk. "Might not fit right, but they're clean." Martha remained by the door. "Your wife won't mind?" "She's gone, 3 years now." Jack set a folded dress and shawl on the table. "You can have the cabin. I'll sleep in the barn." "You're giving me your house after paying all that money?" Suspicion edged her voice. "What do you want in return?" Jack finally looked at her directly. "Nothing." "Men always want something. Not this one." He moved to the stove, stirring the banked coals. "There's food in the pantry, water from the pump out back. You need anything else, just ask." Martha didn't move. "You don't even know what I did. Figure that's your business, unless you want to tell me." The silence stretched between them, taut as fence wire. Finally, Martha spoke. "They came to take my land, 3 of them. Said I owed taxes, but I'd paid. Had the receipt to prove it." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "They said a woman couldn't own property without a husband anyway. Said they'd be doing me a favor, taking it off my hands." Jack nodded, waiting. "When I told them to leave, they laughed. Started breaking things. Said they'd break me too." Her eyes were distant, seeing that day instead of Jack's cabin. "I was cutting wood when they came. Still had the axe in my hands." "Self-defense," Jack said quietly. Martha's laugh held no humor. "That's not how the town saw it. Woman my size using an axe on men. Must be a monster. Must be unnatural." Jack added wood to the stove. "People fear what they don't understand, and they don't much try to understand what's easier to fear." "And you?" Martha asked. "You're not afraid of the monster of Willow Creek?" Jack looked up sharply. "I don't see any monster here." Something passed between them then, a recognition perhaps. Martha looked away first. "I'll take the barn," she said. "You keep your home." "No need." "I've slept rougher places than a clean barn with hay," she interrupted. "And I've had enough of people deciding things for me." Jack studied her a moment, then nodded. "As you wish, but the offer stands if you change your mind." As he gathered blankets for her, Jack felt the weight of the day settling into his bones. $500 gone. His dreams of Colorado postponed, perhaps forever. And now a woman with a dark reputation under his roof, the town already turning against him. What had he done? And more importantly, what would he do next? Later that evening, after sharing a simple meal in uncomfortable silence, Jack sat by the stove mending a bridle while Martha stood at the window, looking out at the gathering darkness. "They'll come for me," she said suddenly. "The town won't let it rest." Jack's hands continued their steady work. "Let them come. You can't fight a whole town. Don't plan to fight anyone. But I don't plan to give in either." Martha turned from the window. You're a fool, Jack Morrison. Been called worse. He set aside the bridle and reached for the small wooden box on the mantel. Opening it, he removed a gold band, simple, worn smooth by years of wear. "This was Emma's," he said, holding it up. "My wife's." Martha watched him warily. "I've been thinking," Jack continued, turning the ring in his fingers. "Town won't bother a married woman same as they would a single one, especially not one with a husband holding legal standing." Understanding dawned in Martha's eyes. "You're suggesting—" "A marriage of convenience," Jack clarified. "On paper only, would give you protection under the law that I can't offer any other way." "Why would you do that?" Jack considered the question carefully. "Because sometimes the only way to fight wrong is to use the rules against those who made them." He placed the ring on the table between them. "We could ride to Pinnerill tomorrow. Judge, there doesn't know either of us. Get it done legal and proper." Martha stared at the small gold band. "You'd give me your name, after everything?" "It's just a name," Jack said, "and it's your choice. I'm not deciding for you, just offering an option." Martha reached slowly for the ring, her large hand making it seem even smaller. She didn't put it on, just held it, studying the way the firelight played across its surface. "My husband died 6 years ago," she said quietly. "Fever took him same as your wife. Never thought I'd have another." Jack waited, saying nothing. "I'll think on it," she finally said, placing the ring back on the table. But when she slipped out to the barn a few minutes later, the ring went with her. And for the first time since he'd seen her in that cage, Jack felt something like hope stirring in his chest. Jack woke before dawn, as was his habit. He built up the stove fire and put coffee on to boil, moving quietly through the familiar motions. When he stepped outside to fetch water, he was surprised to find Martha already at the pump, filling a bucket. "Morning," he said, keeping his distance so as not to startle her. She straightened, nodding acknowledgement. "Figured I'd make myself useful." Her hair was pulled back in a simple knot, and she wore the dress he'd given her. Emma's old work dress, patched at the elbows but clean. It was short on her tall frame, revealing sturdy boots beneath. "Appreciate it," Jack said. "Coffee's on if you want some." They worked in parallel that morning, finding a rhythm without needing many words. Jack noticed how Martha moved with efficiency around the homestead, her large hands surprisingly deft at each task she undertook. When he began repairing a broken fence post, she joined him without being asked, holding the post steady while he tamped earth around it. "You've done this before," he observed. "Had 40 acres in Red Rock," she replied. "Ran it myself after my husband passed." "Good land?" "Good enough. Rocky in parts, but the creek never ran dry." A shadow crossed her face. "Built everything from nothing, Caleb and me." Jack worked the soil around the post. "Hard to leave something you built. Harder to stay when they take it." She tested the post with a firm shake. "This'll hold now." After breakfast, Jack mentioned needing to check his trap line up in the north pasture. Martha offered to feed the stock while he was gone. When he returned midday, he found her not just feeding the animals, but mending a tear in the barn door he'd been meaning to fix for weeks. "Don't need to work so hard," he said, approaching with a brace of rabbits for their dinner. "You're not a hired hand." Martha hammered in another nail before answering. "I don't take charity well, Mr. Morrison. Work's all I know." "Jack," he corrected. "If we're considering marriage, even just on paper, might as well use first names." Something almost like a smile touched her lips. "Jack, then." She gestured to the rabbits. "I can skin those if you want. Was always better at it than Caleb. He had the patience for trapping, but not for the cleaning." As she expertly dressed the rabbits later, Jack found himself asking about her life before. Slowly, haltingly at first, Martha shared more about her homestead in Red Rock, the orchard she'd planted, the goats she'd raised for milk and cheese, the small cabin that had finally felt like home after years of wandering. "Those men who came," Jack said carefully, "you said they claimed you owed taxes." Martha's hands stilled momentarily. "Was a lie. I'd paid. But they had connections with the land office. Been trying to get my property for years. Good water access, you see. After Caleb died, they figured a woman alone would be easy to drive off." "But you weren't." "No." Her voice was quiet but firm. "I wasn't." Jack nodded, understanding more than she said. A woman alone, especially one of unusual height and strength, would have faced constant challenges to her independence. "Those men," she continued after a moment, "they weren't just trying to take my land that day." Her meaning was clear without elaboration. "You defended yourself," Jack said simply. "Yes." She met his eyes directly. "I'd do it again." Jack held her gaze. "As you should." Something shifted between them then, a mutual recognition of shared values, despite their different paths. They finished preparing the meal together, and for the first time the silence between them felt comfortable rather than strained. That evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Jack broached the subject that had been on his mind all day. "Been thinking about what happens next," he said, pouring them each a small measure of whiskey. "This town won't let things lie. Franklin has influence, and folks are superstitious about differences." Martha took a sip of whiskey. "I've lived with that my whole life." "Figured as much." Jack stared into the fire. "Maybe time for a fresh start somewhere folks don't know either of us." "What did you have in mind?" "Colorado," Jack said, the word carrying the weight of long-held dreams. "Been saving to head there for years now. Good grazing land in some parts. Mountains like I grew up with in Tennessee." Martha studied him. "Why haven't you gone already?" Jack shrugged. "After Emma died, just didn't see the point for a while. Then inertia, I suppose. Easier to stay put than start over." "And now?" "Now I've got reason to move." He looked at her directly. "If you're amenable, we could leave end of the week." "Sell what we can't take, buy a wagon and supplies." Martha was quiet for a long moment. "I can cook, farm, handle stock. Good with a needle, too, though you wouldn't think it looking at these hands." She flexed her large, capable fingers. "I'd earn my keep." "Never doubted it," Jack said. "But that's not why I'm suggesting this." "Then why?" Jack considered his words carefully. "Some wrongs you can't make right, but you can refuse to let them define what comes next." Martha nodded slowly, understanding his meaning. She pulled Emma's gold ring from her pocket. She'd been carrying it since he'd offered it, and turned it in the firelight. "I've been thinking about your proposal," she said. "A marriage of convenience." "Still stands," Jack replied. "No obligations beyond what's written on paper." "Paper's important, though," Martha said. "Without it, I couldn't own property in my own right. Couldn't protect what's mine." "That's why I offered." Martha slipped the ring onto her finger. It barely fit past her knuckle. "Then I accept, Jack Morrison, though I'm not sure what you're getting from this arrangement." Jack allowed himself a small smile. "Peace of mind, I suppose, and good company on a long journey." Over the next 2 days, they prepared for departure. Jack sold what livestock he couldn't take, all but the pinto stallion and a sturdy draft horse for pulling the wagon. Martha proved skilled with a needle, altering some of Jack's spare clothes to better fit her frame and mending what needed repair. They worked well together, Jack noticed. She wasn't one for idle chatter, which suited him fine. When she did speak, her words carried weight, and she approached each task with the same thoroughness and care he valued in himself. At the general store, Walter Green looked surprised to see Jack with Martha at his side, but to his credit, he treated her with respectful courtesy. "Heard you were leaving," Walter said, as he filled their order for supplies. "Folks talking all over town." "Folks usually do," Jack replied, counting out money for flour, coffee, and ammunition. Walter leaned closer. "Franklin's been making noise about that woman being dangerous. Some are listening." "Martha's my concern now," Jack said firmly, "and will be gone before week's end." Walter nodded, then glanced around to ensure they were alone. "For what it's worth, Doc Harper mentioned something interesting yesterday. Said those men Martha supposedly killed had land office connections. Said there'd been complaints about them forging documents, threatening folks out of their property." He shrugged. "Just talk, mind you." Jack exchanged a look with Martha, whose face remained impassive, though her eyes showed awareness of what this meant. They had at least one person in town who might not believe Franklin's version of events. "Obliged for the information," Jack said, gathering their purchases. "Where you heading?" Walter asked. "Colorado," Jack replied. "Fresh start." Walter nodded thoughtfully. "Sarah's brother's out that way. Says the land's good if you don't mind the winters." He hesitated, then added, "You too?" "Getting married in Pinerill," Jack confirmed. "Simpler that way." Something like approval flickered in Walter's eyes. "Well then, I wish you both the best of it." The night before their planned departure, Jack and Martha sat on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Their wagon stood ready, loaded with the essentials for their journey: tools, supplies, seeds for planting, Jack's few books, Martha's small wooden box of keepsakes from her previous life. "Should take us about 3 weeks to reach Colorado territory," Jack said, "if weather holds." Martha nodded. "What about the wedding? Still want to stop in Pinerill?" Jack turned to look at her, surprised by the question. "Unless you've changed your mind." "No," she said quickly. "Just wondering if it should happen before we leave. Makes things more official if anyone tries to stop us." Jack considered this. "Pinnerill's only half a day's ride. We can be there by noon tomorrow, find a judge or preacher, be on our way properly, married by sundown." "You're sure about this?" Martha asked, her voice unusually hesitant. "Binding yourself to someone like me? Someone like you? You know what people see when they look at me." Jack studied her in the fading light, her strong profile, her capable hands, her direct gaze that met the world without flinching. "I see a woman who survived," he said simply, "who refused to be broken, who works harder than most men I've known." He paused. "What do you see when you look at me?" Martha seemed startled by the question. After a moment she answered, "A man who stands by his word, who does what's right without making a show of it." She hesitated. "A man I could trust." The words hung between them, more meaningful than either had intended. Jack felt something shift in his chest. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The foundation for something that might grow, given time and care. "Then I'd say we've got a fair chance at making this work," he said quietly. "Whatever shape it takes." Martha nodded, looking back to the stars. "Colorado," she said, testing the word. "Never been further west than Kansas." It's good country, Jack assured her. Big sky, room to breathe. Room to start again, Martha added softly. As night deepened around them, Jack felt a curious sense of rightness about the path ahead. This arrangement had begun as a practical solution, a way to right a wrong. But sitting here with Martha, planning their journey together, it felt like more than that. It felt like purpose, like possibility. And for a man who'd been drifting since he lost Emma, that was no small thing. Dawn broke clear and cool as Jack hitched the draft horse to their loaded wagon. Martha secured the last bundles, her movements efficient after days of preparation. They would reach Pinerill by noon, be married by a judge, and begin their journey to Colorado, properly bound in the eyes of the law. That's the last of it, Martha said, testing a rope's tension. Jack nodded, giving the harness a final check. Ready when you are. The sound of approaching horses made them both turn. Coming up the road was a group of riders, 6 men led by Franklin, their expressions grim in the early light. Trouble, Jack said quietly, positioning himself between Martha and the approaching men. I figured they might come, Martha replied, her voice steady, though her hands clenched at her sides. Franklin reined in his horse, the others fanning out behind him in a half-circle. Jack recognized most of them: the blacksmith, 2 ranch hands from the Watson place, a shopkeeper, and Lester Davis, with his big mouth and small courage. "Morning, gentlemen," Jack said evenly. "Something I can help you with?" "You know why we're here, Morrison," Franklin said, his hand resting too casually near his holstered pistol. "That woman's coming back with us." "Mrs. Kane is leaving with me," Jack replied, maintaining a calm he didn't entirely feel. "We're heading to Pinerill this morning to be married, then on to Colorado." Franklin's laugh held no humor. "Married? To that?" He gestured toward Martha. "She's not going anywhere except back in that cage where she belongs." "She has a name," Jack replied calmly, stepping slightly forward. "Mrs. Kane has committed no crime that any court would recognize." "She killed 3 men," Franklin's voice rose. "Who attacked her on her own property," Jack countered. "Any one of you would have done the same." "She ain't natural," Lester called from behind Franklin. "Look at the size of her." Jack's voice remained steady. "I look at her and see a woman who's survived more hardship than most, and I aim to see she gets a fair chance at a decent life." Franklin dismounted, and the others followed suit. The air thickened with tension. "We don't want trouble with you, Jack," the blacksmith said, almost apologetically. "But Franklin says she's dangerous. Says she'll kill again." "And you believe that?" Jack asked, looking from man to man. "Or are you just going along because it's easier than thinking for yourselves?" Franklin stepped forward. "Don't matter what they believe. I'm taking her back." His hand moved to his gun. "Step aside, Morrison." "No." Jack didn't reach for his own weapon. "I paid fair and square. She's a free woman now." "Then I'll take her by force," Franklin growled. The moment hung suspended, men with hands hovering near weapons, the morning sun climbing higher, a hawk circling overhead as if waiting to see who would fall. Then Martha stepped forward, moving to stand beside Jack rather than behind him. "You want me?" Her voice rang clear in the morning air. "Then hear the truth first." The men shifted uneasily, some taking involuntary steps back. Martha stood tall, her dignity a shield against their fear. "Those men came to my land claiming I owed taxes I'd already paid," she said. "I showed them the receipt. They didn't care." Her eyes swept the group. "They said a woman couldn't own property without a husband anyway. Said they'd be doing me a favor, taking it off my hands." The blacksmith frowned. "Franklin, you said she just up and killed those men for collecting a legitimate debt." She's lying, Franklin snapped. She's a killer. When I told them to leave, Martha continued as if he hadn't spoken. They laughed, started breaking things, said they'd break me too. Her voice remained steady, but Jack could see the old pain in her eyes. I was cutting wood when they came, had the axe in my hands. When they tried to... She paused, then simply said, I defended myself. A heavy silence followed. Jack could see uncertainty creeping into some of the men's faces. It's a good story, Franklin sneered, but you've got no proof. Actually, came a new voice from the road, she does. They all turned to see Doc Harper riding toward them. The town's physician, a man of some 60 years, dismounted with the careful movements of aging joints. He nodded to Jack and Martha, then faced the group. I was the one who examined those men after they were found, he said. Never did sit right with me. 3 grown men supposedly killed by one woman, without a mark on her? He shook his head. Then I remembered something. One of those men, Jenkins, had scratches on his face and neck, different from his other injuries, like fingernail marks from someone fighting him off. What's your point, Doc? Franklin demanded. My point is, those weren't the marks of an axe murder. Those were the marks of a woman defending herself from something no woman should have to endure. The doctor's gaze was steady. And there's something else. Those men had a reputation over in Red Rock, land office connections, complaints about forged documents, threatening folks out of their property. That true, Franklin? The blacksmith asked, turning. Franklin's face had gone rigid. Harper doesn't know what he's talking about. Strange coincidence, though, Doc Harper continued. You getting that parcel of land in Red Rock right after Mrs. Kane was run out, land with the best water access in the county. A murmur ran through the men. Franklin's hand tightened on his gun. You had business with those men, Jack said, the pieces falling into place. You knew what they were doing to Martha. Shut your mouth, Franklin hissed. What did they promise you? Jack pressed. A cut of the land, maybe water rights for your saloon. Must have been something good to make you cage a woman for folks to gawk at. Franklin drew his gun then, desperation replacing calculation. I said shut up. The movement was swift, but Martha was swifter. Before anyone could react, she lunged forward, her large hand closing around Franklin's wrist with crushing strength. The gun clattered to the ground. I'm not going back in that cage, she said, her voice deadly quiet. Not today, not ever. Franklin struggled, but her grip was immovable. The other men stood frozen, witnessing a tableau that would rewrite everything they thought they knew. Let him go, Martha, Jack said after a moment. He's not worth it. She released Franklin, who stumbled back, nursing his wrist. You broke my arm, you monster, he snarled. It's not broken, Doc Harper said, after a quick examination, though it will bruise something fierce. His eyes met Martha's. Remarkable restraint, Mrs. Kane. The blacksmith stepped forward then. I've heard enough. Franklin, you lied to us, brought us out here on false pretenses. She killed those men, Franklin insisted, but his voice had lost its authority. In self-defense, Doc Harper countered. Any man here would have done the same if someone tried to take what was rightfully his. The mood had shifted palpably. The men who had arrived ready for confrontation now stood awkward and uncertain, unwilling to meet Martha's eyes. I think we're done here, Jack said quietly. Martha and I are leaving for Pinerill, then Colorado. Any man who has a problem with that can speak now. No one did. Franklin, seeing his support crumble, made one last attempt. You'll regret this, he said to Jack. Both of you. Jack looked at him with something close to pity. Only thing I'd regret is standing by while an innocent person suffers. Can't say the same for you." The group began to disperse, some nodding respectfully to Jack, others simply eager to distance themselves from Franklin's schemes. Doc Harper approached Martha and Jack. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner," he said. "I had my suspicions from the beginning, but no proof. Then Walter Green mentioned you were leaving, and I knew I had to act." "You came at the right time," Jack said, extending his hand. "We're obliged." "I hope you find what you're looking for in Colorado," the doctor said, shaking Jack's hand. Then, after a moment's hesitation, Martha's as well. "Thank you," Martha said, her voice thick with emotion she rarely showed. As Doc Harper mounted his horse to leave, he paused. "If you're still planning on getting married today, you might want this." He handed Jack a folded paper. "Letter of introduction to Judge Wilson in Pineril. Good man. Won't ask too many questions." Jack took the paper with gratitude. "Much obliged, Doc." When they were alone again, Martha and Jack stood in silence for a moment, absorbing what had just happened. "Well," Jack finally said, "reckon we should get going if we want to reach Pineril by noon." Martha nodded, but her eyes were troubled. "Those men believed him so easily, about me being a monster." "People believe what's easy," Jack replied. "Takes courage to look deeper." "Like you did?" A question lingered in her voice. Jack considered this. "Maybe. Or maybe I just recognized something in you I understood." "What's that?" "The look of someone who's been judged before they were known." Jack checked the wagon one last time. "Ready?" Martha climbed up to the wagon seat, her expression clearing. "Ready." As they pulled away from the small ranch that had been Jack's home for 3 years, neither looked back. What mattered now wasn't what they were leaving behind, but what lay ahead. A journey to Colorado, a fresh start, and the chance to build something new together, not as monster and savior, but as two people who had seen beyond the labels others had placed on them, to the truth underneath. Pineril wasn't much different from Willow Creek, another frontier town with dusty streets, weathered buildings, and curious glances for newcomers. But to Jack and Martha, arriving at midday with Doc Harper's letter of introduction, it might as well have been a new world. Judge Wilson's office sat above the general store, accessed by an exterior staircase that creaked under their weight. A balding man with spectacles perched on a prominent nose. The judge read Doc Harper's letter twice before studying the couple before him. "Harper's a good man," he said finally. "Known him 20 years. He set the letter aside. "Says here you two are looking to be married before continuing to Colorado territory." "That's right," Jack confirmed. The judge's eyes lingered briefly on Martha's unusual height, but his expression remained professionally neutral. "Any reason for the hurry?" "Just eager to reach Colorado before winter sets in," Jack replied evenly. "Proper to travel as man and wife." Judge Wilson nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Need 2 witnesses. My clerk can serve as one, Mrs. Wilson's likely at the Mercantile. She can stand as the other." An hour later, in the judge's office with late afternoon sun slanting through dusty windows, Jack and Martha exchanged the simplest of vows. The ceremony took less than 5 minutes. Names stated, consent given, papers signed. Jack placed Emma's gold ring on Martha's finger, where it still fit a bit too snugly, but now had meaning neither had anticipated when he'd first offered it. "By the authority vested in me by the state, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Wilson declared without ceremony. Mrs. Wilson, a plump woman with kind eyes, offered her congratulations. The clerk recorded the marriage in a large ledger, and just like that, Martha Kane became Martha Morrison. As they stepped back onto Pinnerill's main street, Martha paused, a strange expression crossing her face. "Something wrong?" Jack asked. She shook her head slowly. "Just strange. All my life, people have stared at me. Here, they just see a woman with her husband." It was true. The townspeople they passed offered polite nods, or paid them no mind at all, no fearful glances, no whispered comments. In Pinerill, they were simply another couple passing through. At the general store, Jack purchased additional supplies for their journey, while Martha selected fabric for new clothes. When the shopkeeper asked her name for the purchase, she hesitated only briefly. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, the words unfamiliar but welcome on her tongue. The shopkeeper nodded, writing it down without a second glance. "Traveling far, Mrs. Morrison?" "Colorado," she replied, still marveling at the ordinary conversation. "Beautiful country, I hear. My sister's boy went out that way last year." He wrapped her purchases in brown paper. "You and your husband should have fine weather for traveling this time of year." Martha nodded, accepting the package and her new identity with equal care. They secured a room at the town's modest hotel, a real bed for the first time in days, a luxury neither took for granted. After a proper meal in the hotel dining room, they walked to the edge of town where their wagon was parked, checking on the horses before retiring for the night. The evening air carried the first hint of autumn crispness as they stood looking westward toward mountains still hundreds of miles distant, but now feeling somehow closer. "Never thought I'd have a name that didn't make people afraid," Martha said quietly. Jack looked up from adjusting the Pinto's lead rope. "Morrison's nothing special." "It is to me." She met his eyes. "A name freely given, not taken or feared." Jack nodded, understanding more than she'd said. "In Colorado, we can be whoever we choose to be." "And who will you choose to be, Jack Morrison?" He considered this. "Reckon I'll just try to be a man my wife can be proud of." The word wife hung between them, no longer just a legal arrangement, but a possibility neither had expected. Martha's gaze held his for a long moment before she looked away, but not before Jack caught the glimmer of something new there, hope, perhaps, or maybe something more. "I should thank you," she said, her voice low but steady, "for everything you've done." "No need," Jack replied. "You'd have found your way eventually." "Maybe, but not like this." She gestured to the road ahead. "Not with a fresh start and—" She hesitated. "Not with someone who sees me as just Martha." Jack's weathered face softened. "That's all I've ever seen." They stood in companionable silence as twilight deepened around them. Finally, Jack spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "You know, when Emma died, I thought that was it for me. Figured I'd just live out my days alone, waiting to join her." He stared at the horizon. "These past few years, I've been existing, not living, going through the motions." Martha listened quietly. "Then I saw you in that cage," he continued, "and something woke up inside me, something I thought was gone for good." "What was that?" Martha asked. "Purpose," Jack said simply. "The feeling that what I did mattered." Martha nodded slowly. "I understand that. After Caleb died, my land was all I had, my purpose. When they took that—" She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "But that's behind us now." "Yes," Jack agreed. "What's ahead is what matters." As they walked back to the hotel, their steps fell naturally in rhythm. Two people who had found in each other something neither expected, not just safety or practicality, but the beginnings of understanding, of connection. Morning came clear and bright. Jack was up early, as was his habit, and found Martha already dressed and repacking their few belongings. "Slept well?" he asked. "Better than I have in months," she admitted. No cage walls, no eyes watching. They ate breakfast in the hotel dining room, then headed to the general store for final purchases. The shopkeeper from yesterday greeted them with friendly recognition. "Heading out today, folks?" "With the morning," Jack confirmed, selecting additional ammunition, dried goods, and medical supplies. The shopkeeper wrapped their purchases efficiently. "You two make a fine team," he observed. "Sensible preparations. Seen too many head west with nothing but dreams and half a sack of flour." Jack glanced at Martha, who was examining a bolt of sturdy canvas. "We've both done our share of hard living. Know what to expect." "That'll serve you well." The shopkeeper leaned forward confidentially. "Brother-in-law works for the land office in Denver. Says good homestead claims still available south of there. Good water, decent soil. For folks willing to work." "Much obliged for the information," Jack said, paying for their supplies. As they loaded the wagon, Martha's movements were different, more fluid, less guarded. She moved through town with a straight back and lifted chin, not hiding her height or strength, but simply being herself. Jack noticed the change. "Suits you?" he said. "What does?" "Not having to make yourself smaller." Martha considered this. "Been hunching my shoulders since I was 12. Girls weren't supposed to be tall." "Seems to me being exactly who you are has served you well," Jack observed. "Kept you alive when those men came, helped you survive that cage." "And brought me here," Martha added quietly, "with you." The sun climbed higher as they finished securing their loads. Jack checked the harness one last time, then helped Martha up to the wagon seat before taking his place beside her. "3 weeks to Denver, weather permitting," he said, taking up the reins. "Ready?" Martha looked ahead to the western horizon, then at the man beside her, the unlikely husband who had seen her worth when others saw only fear. She thought of all they had overcome and all that still lay ahead, the challenges of the trail, the uncertainty of Colorado, the slow building of something neither had dared hope for again. "Ready," she said, and meant it. As the wagon rolled forward, leaving Pineril behind, Martha and Jack faced west together, toward mountains and forests they had yet to see, toward land they would work with their own hands, toward a future neither could have imagined just weeks before. Not as the giant widow and the grieving rancher, but as Martha and Jack Morrison. Two people who had found in each other not just rescue or practicality, but the rarest of gifts, the chance to be seen for who they truly were, and valued all the more for it. You know, looking back on Jack and Martha's story reminds me of something my daddy used to say. "Son, the measure of a person isn't what they do when the path is clear. It's the choices they make when the whole world's telling them they're wrong." Jack Morrison wasn't looking to be anyone's hero that day in Willow Creek. He was just a man who couldn't stand by while someone suffered, even when helping her cost him nearly everything he had. And Martha? She showed us that sometimes the monsters we fear most are just wounded souls waiting for someone to see past their scars. The strength it took for her to maintain her dignity in that cage, to trust Jack when trust had cost her so dearly before. That's a kind of courage most folks never have to find within themselves. I reckon we've all been on both sides of that fence at some point, afraid of what we don't understand, or hoping someone will look deeper than our rough edges. We've all known what it's like to be judged before we're understood, and most of us have been guilty of doing the judging too. What Jack and Martha found together wasn't just a marriage of convenience or a way to escape their pasts. They found a chance to be seen for who they truly were, not as the grieving widower or the fearsome giant, but as two people worthy of respect, dignity, and maybe even love. The courage to see people as they truly are, not as others label them. That's a rare quality in this world, and worth every sacrifice it demands. It's the kind of courage that changes not just one life, but ripples outward to touch many others. Even the doc found his voice when he saw Jack standing up for what was right. In the end, that's what matters most. Not how tall we stand, but how straight we stand for what we believe in. Not how much we have, but what we're willing to give. Not how others see us, but how clearly we see ourselves and each other.